Welcome to the Executive Coach Podcast. Now, when it comes to high achievers, what holds us back is rarely a lack of skill or effort. It's those invisible patterns that are running in the background. These are the tendencies that, if left unchecked, quietly sabotage our performance, drain our well-being, strain our relationships, and they make success feel harder than it needs to be. What if I could give you a framework to make those patterns feel visible in a structured way so that you could name them in yourself and in those around you? And most importantly, understand how you can then shift them. That's exactly what we're going to do over the next 3 episodes. We're going to explore the positive intelligence framework by Shirzad Chamine, and I'm going to have my guest Graziela to do that with. And because Graziela and I are executive coaches, we see these saboteurs all the time. They show up in situations with clients, in organizations, and even in the home. So what might seem like an abstract framework on paper, we're going to bring it to life because we have so many examples to discuss of how these play out in the real world. So today we're laying the foundations. You will hear an overview of the saboteurs and you'll meet the judge, which is that master saboteur that shows up again and again in my work with my clients and who you may recognize very well as you listen to the episode. And then we will zoom in over the following episodes into some of the saboteurs that trip up my high achievers in particular. And these are the hyperachiever, the hyper-rational, the pleaser, and the stickler or perfectionist. So what I recommend is for this episode, pop your headphones in, head out for a walk, and let this first episode wash over you. It will leave you with a new lens on yourself and the people around you. And it will set you up for the rest of the series, which will give you those practical ways to transform your performance, relationships, and the results that you get. So let's dive into today's episode. Today, I am delighted to have my guest with me, Graziela. I stumbled across Graziela at an LBS workshop. We are both part of the London Business School coaching and leadership development community. The wonderful part of that is that we have regular community development events, and they are very good at picking the most relevant, exciting speakers for us to listen to. And Graziela was one of those for us at the last event, and she totally caught my attention. She was talking to us about the positive intelligence framework. Now, it wasn't the first time I had come across this framework. It's starting to be established as a pretty go-to framework. So I'm going to hand over to Graziela now. So hi, Graziela. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Maya. I love your work. I've listened to your podcast, and I think we are so aligned in what we're trying to achieve as coaches for executives and leaders.
So let's dive into the framework. And I was wondering if you could give us an overview of what the saboteurs are and why they matter in our everyday thinking and behavior.
Credit where credit is due. So the founder of this positive intelligence theory, Shirzad Chamine, was the CEO of one of the largest coaching organizations in the world and where I got my training. And so I certified and he did a lot of research. He coached a lot of CEOs. He also included athletes in his research. And he came up with this framework of 9 ways in which you self-sabotage. And then we have the 10th way, which is the judge, the master of all saboteurs, which is this critical negative voice. And the idea behind is that we all know that we have some pre-programmed tendencies, for example, to be a bit too controlling or to be a bit too perfectionist or to worry too much. But he positioned those in a way that is super easy to understand. And he explains that the reason why they are self-sabotage is that we have the best intentions to control, for example, or to worry so that bad things don't happen and we take advantage, we are prepared for the future. But when we overuse those tendencies, it doesn't serve us, and it has a huge cost to our relationships, and especially on how we are perceived by others. And by being aware of those tendencies, you then can step back and change. And that change releases a lot of positive energy that you can use to focus on the things that matter.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, can we get into some of the saboteurs? There are 9. The ones that I picked out were avoider, controller, hyperachiever, rational, pleaser, and stickler. So those are the ones that as I've heard about this a few times now, are the ones that I see most commonly in the work that I do. So I was wondering if you wanted to give any descriptions of those particular ones that I've mentioned, or if you have any favorites out of those.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you the ones that show up more regularly in my coaching practice, because I'm coaching senior leaders that have had success. They've reached a point where they have been promoted, they are in charge of a lot of people and teams. And what I see more common is the controller. I know better. My way is the better way. The hyper rational, which is about using data to make decisions and not always being in sync with the team's emotional needs, or understanding where they are and having that empathy. So the hyper rational is very common. The avoider also comes up, and not as common, but avoider shows up in ways that can be really detrimental, which is not talk about the elephant in the room. We know we have this problem, but let's hope it goes away. And when you look at leadership effectiveness, courageous authenticity is the opposite of that, right? It's like, let's talk, let's have the difficult conversations. The stickler also shows up, which is this tendency to be a perfectionist and to expect very high standards of yourself and others that comes to the detriment of relationships. And of course, the hyperachiever shows up a lot, which is, how a lot of us have been conditioned. It's always the next trophy, the next prize, and the hamster wheel. When does it end? You get that and you go to the next. And your whole value and your whole sense of worthiness is connected to achieving. And that also has a very high cost to yourself and the people who work with you. So I hope there's a good, we can definitely get into more specifics into each of them. Let me know which one makes more interesting for you.
I think it sounds like we are, both you and I are coming across the same ones very regularly. About that is the same list that I have. And I actually put avoider first because this comes up a lot in my nice guy leaders, or my clients who have an ultimate boss who is a nice guy or a nice gal. So they are first and foremost lovely, described as a really nice person, and the word nice comes up a lot. Nice isn't always the same as the word kind. So I always say, look, sometimes in order to be kind inside an organization, we need to be clear, we need to be direct, and we need to not avoid the really difficult conversations. Because, there are sayings, aren't there, around if you make it your job to keep avoiding conflict, you actually make your job so much more difficult in the end. So I see that one a lot. And as somebody who is direct myself, I find it quite stressful to sort of encounter those personalities, because you can feel like you're walking on eggshells, or that you may come across too strong in their presence, because you sense that you can't create anything that might look like conflict, because it would be so terrible. So that one definitely I put first. But of course, I was just working actually last week with hyperachiever, hyper rational, and it's amazing because I think when you're inside organizations, you can really be rewarded for being a hyperachiever, and you can be rewarded for being hyper rational. So even some of the personality assessments reward people who seem calm, rational, unemotional, but actually you can miss so much if you take that highly rational stance. So yeah, definitely I think we seem to be coming across similar sets of traits inside organizations. I guess my next question for you is this judge. So tell me about this judge that kind of sits above all of these traits.
So the judge, the way I like to describe is that critical inner voice that comes up, and it comes sometimes partnered with the stickler or the perfectionism or the controller, and it drags you down in the sense that it's critical of yourself, it's critical of circumstances, it's critical of other people. It has a very strong negativity bias. And what happens is when you allow the judge to control your thoughts and your minds, and we all have negativity bias. In fact, we have about 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day, and about 80% of them can be negative. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to the judge and not let it take over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess with the judge, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we all have our own ways of judging. And I think as coaches, one of the first things we learn is, I guess, to put aside judgment, because that's what creates a safe space. What I'm interested in is we all kind of know people who are highly judgmental, right? They're quick to judge, right? And I don't know if this is the case. I don't know if empathy is the opposite of judgment, but I think the more we can understand others, the easier it is to sort of not fall into a place of judgment. Would you say that those who are often highly judgmental are also probably going to be experiencing some of these other saboteurs in their own lives? Like, do you think there is a bit of a correlation between perhaps what we might see in somebody and what their inner world, what they are experiencing?
Absolutely. And if you look at research on psychology, most people that are harsh of others, they are harsh of themselves as well. It's just how they operate. And so that's why I think this work is so beautiful, because when I worked with leaders, I mean, ultimately they come to me to become better leaders, but the positive repercussion of working on those self-sabotage tendencies spreads throughout the whole life. You know, how they show up as parents, as colleagues, as siblings, as children, you know, to their own parents. It can be really transformational. So understanding your automatic thought patterns and your automatic responses is the first step to say, wait a minute, I don't want that to have the impact that it's having on my team, on my relationships. How do I change that?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions now, actually. So if I just remind listeners where we are. So we've got 9 saboteurs. We've touched on some that we see often in the workplace. Those include avoider, controller, hyperachiever, rational, pleaser, stickler. Sitting above that, we have the judge. And the judge is sort of like the master saboteur, and the judge can work together with some of the other saboteurs. The next thing that I thought that I wanted to double click on was this idea that high judgment can often be accompanied in the research with high personal judgment or saboteurs, right? I think that's very interesting because we can start to learn about our own behaviors and also learn about the behaviors of those that impact us,
Yes.
right? So if we're experiencing a huge amount of judgment from others, we can probably also compute that there will be that happening probably for them as well.
Yes, and that awareness can be transformational.
Yeah.
Yes, because
Yeah.
how often when I start working doing this work with clients, I ask them, what percentage of the time are you having a negative thought about yourself? And it's so high, you know. And Shizad even has a test before and after. You know, how are you negative towards yourself before, and once you step back and say, okay, how can I have more empathy, you know, to myself, more self-compassion, more understanding. I was talking to a client today about that actually. You're stepping into a new role every time you are promoted. There's so much pressure, right? And so there's a learning curve. You know, let's acknowledge this is new. You need to give yourself some time to get to know your team, to understand how you're going to play to your strengths here. But no, we want immediate results. We are so harsh, so critical. And when I use the example of children, it really resonates with them. And I say, there are 2 examples that resonate. One is, say, let's say your child comes home and they did really poorly in a test. Yeah. What are you going to say to them? Are you going to criticize and judge and humiliate and make them be angry and make them feel like worthless? Is that going to help? Maybe in the old school, you know, the old ways of trying to motivate people. But sports research shows that the best and most effective coaching is not the anger, because you need psychological safety, you need support, you need encouragement. Yes, you need to be demanding. So that's the voice you need to change into. What are the areas you're struggling with? How can we work on it? Do you need any help? Give yourself that compassion. It's fine. You know, it was one reference point. The chances of that, and we tell ourselves negative stories the whole time. And the other story I always say is, let's say you have a friend who's constantly criticizing you and you know, pushing you down, comparing you, making you feel bad. Would you open the door and invite that friend to your house on a regular basis? Like, do you want that? And you say no. So why do you allow that voice to stay in your head? You know, it's a choice. And paying attention to that voice and turn down and say, okay, what voice do I want to listen to? The encouraging, the positive, the best friend, the motivating. And that can be so transformational because our inner dialogue determines how we show up.
Yeah. Now, I think this is really interesting and important. And just last week I was having a group coaching where I asked the question, so you're very harsh with yourself. This was the admission, right? They sort of said, I judge myself incredibly harshly by very high standards, but for my team that's not the case, right? Like I kind of support them and make them feel welcome and grow. And I put the question on the table, just planted the seed that, what's our take on that? Can we be simultaneously sticklers with ourselves and super harsh with ourselves and simultaneously, really, really supportive to our team? For me, I feel there's a disconnect at some deep level. There is something. I'm really curious on your take on that.
So I'm laughing because I remember reading the book, and Shirzad, the creator of this theory, explains how he was at Stanford Business School and they had a team exercise where everybody had to give feedback to each other. And they consistently said, "You're judgmental." And they're like, "Ah, this is an idiot, this guy." The next person, "You're judgmental." And he's like, "Oh God, another one is a loser." And then you're judgmental. And suddenly it clicked. It's like, oh my God, I'm judgmental. And he knew he was judgmental of himself, but he didn't realize that other people were perceiving. And that's why we called it a blind spot. And very often when you start asking questions, we do uncover that people think they're very good at disguising their judgment, but people perceive it. The people they work with, they perceive it.
What if then somebody said, well, but what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to let go of my standards? I like to do things really well. Like I derive pure joy and pleasure from doing a task well. What would you say to that?
That's why it's called self-sabotage again, because you tell yourself this is a good trait, right? If you're a perfectionist, if you're high achieving, you say this is good, that's what got me here. And I say, well, guess what? What got you here won't take you there. You are now a leader, and your relationship with your team will be effective if you are able to control that tendency. Why? Because it might have worked for you, but people don't like to feel judged. They like to feel understood. They like to feel appreciated. They like to feel heard and listened to. And your drive and ambition to get to a certain goal makes them feel like they are means to an end. And the cost, so why is it, you answer your question, why is it bad? It's not bad if it's in moderation. And finding that balance, okay, I want to do things well versus I'm a perfectionist. Perfectionism doesn't exist, right? It's realizing the cost. Hyperachiever, people feel like they're being used. Controller, completely demotivated.
Yeah, we've specifically zoomed in on controller today, and I guess with controller, and when you were running your workshop when we were at London Business School, one thing I noticed about the controller is that I don't want to be controller. I am high level. I don't want to be in the detail. My happy place is being in the strategic high level stuff, and that's where I'm energized. However, there are going to be times when I feel, or my clients might feel, because they don't have the support in their team that is sufficient, or they have gaps in their team. You're going to feel like if you don't do it, then nobody else will, type thing. So people can feel like they're being pushed into that. So for me, controller will come out when things are not good, when a situation, I think back to house renovation, for example, and there's a lot of moving parts, and suddenly this awful side of you might have to come out. Why? Because you can't let it go, because it's too important and things are going horribly wrong and there's a lot of different people involved. So I think it can come out, and obviously it's latent there. It exists as a behavior I can get into. And I'm just curious what your take is on that.
I mean, this is so common, and thank you for bringing that up. And let's use house renovation. I think that's a good example because in any way, it's something that some of us have experienced and will experience in the future. So what happens? You given a task to somebody, your team member, your house builders, and then it's time to check, and it's wrong, right? So I always give, work on the scenarios, right? So you can say, let's ignore. It will go away, or I can live with that. It's not what I want, but I can live with that. Or push over. That's one. The other extreme is maybe have a huge fight and emotional and, really impact the connection, the relationship. So neither of those are healthy, right? Why? Because in the first case, you're not honoring your value of excellence, and you're not going to be happy with the outcome. The other one, yes, the person will know you're unhappy, but how likely are they to want to please you if they hate you? If they're humiliating them, and if you're using fear-based strategy, I won't pay you, less likely to put the extra efforts to be motivated and loyal, because they suddenly lose the trust or the respect, or they don't feel like a person, they feel like a means to an end. And so that's why the work of composure and being able to step back and say, wait, let me put some perspective here. There must be a miscommunication. There must be a gap in communications. How do I go back to that conversation and explain my expectations and how we can adjust and how we can meet in the middle, and what is the minimum level of expectations that I have, and how we can work together to get to that place. It's a collaborative approach where we are voicing a dissatisfaction and you are creating a safe space for collaboration so that you can both find a solution. Can you see the difference? So it's the
Absolutely.
response that is
And
different, and it's not automatic.
yeah, it's the response, and I think also kind of the intention behind it that can just subtly shift and can create a different outcome. So, for example, I was living nearby the renovation, we had to move out, but I was sort of showing up multiple times a day. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have picked up on things. So, for example, the floorboards all came out and they were like nothing like the sample, and they had big black marks over them. And so, had I not been there to check rather than just go, you know what, deal with it yourselves, I don't want to be there, then there would have been permanent things that would have been very, very difficult.
Yes.
Right. So, my point is that we may, there's a reason, I guess, why controller exists, and that just like some other assessments, there can be a strength-based version of something, and there can be a derailer version of something.
Yes, and I see the
And I guess,
value of the wanting to reduce the chances of failure or problems. However, we also have to adjust our expectations to the kind of people we are dealing with, right? So, we do need to be aware of the level of education, understanding, drive, how motivated are they in the job that they do, to go the extra mile, to really pay attention, take notes. And so how do we motivate and encourage people to be followers in a way that they, if you build a connection and you appreciate what they do, they want to please you, they want to do a good job, and they might even do the extra mile without you asking, or they might pay more attention to your guidelines. But it's really difficult when that's based on fear and a sort of an autocratic model.
but I think the other thing there that you've mentioned again, and these are quite subtle shifts, right? Because I'm thinking about all the frustrations that go on for people. Like, in that particular scenario, let's not forget that there were some serious gender things going on, right? They do. So can you imagine all of that? So, but actually, what you've just described is putting the empathy hat on, not the judge hat. So the more that we can put the empathy hat on, the more that we can have constructive conversations. And I think sometimes, as the leader, we do need to find a place to put our frustration so that we can then come to the interaction with the right intentions,
exactly.
or with good
and
intentions.
that's the space that I'm talking about. Step back, and how do I want to show up? And to the gender point, which is super relevant in the workplace. Like, I work with women that are in the financial sector, senior, but still feeling that gender stereotype. I'm not listening. They're not listening to me. I don't have a voice. And one of the things that I encourage is the empathy towards them. And sometimes there are a lot of people in the room that haven't grown up with the model of a female leader with authority that has knowledge. And it's scary. It can be scary to be in that room. And they don't have frameworks of reference. And so that's why sometimes it's hard to, when we look at women that are powerful and impactful, and they are assertive, they come out as aggressive. But why does a guy doesn't come out as aggressive when a woman does? Because this is a not very well known model of leadership. And so not having the reference makes you scared. And so you react negatively against it. And it's our job to make it more common.
I'm glad that you did pick up on the gender dynamics, because I have to say, I have never experienced gender dynamics as I did in that renovation. And it was a good lesson, actually. So Okay, I want to wrap up this part of the conversation and then we're going to reconvene and get into a couple of the other saboteurs and then some of the sage pieces, right? So that people have some more practical things around some of the other saboteurs, which I know will be of interest to them. So thank you for kicking off today.
Thank you so much. Likewise, it's lovely to work with you, and I can see the topic resonates a lot, and I love talking about that because it's been so critical for my coaching and helpful for the clients. So thank you for inviting me.
Perfect. And if people wanted to look you up anywhere or find out more about what you do you have somewhere that you can point
LinkedIn is
people?
the easiest. So just look up my name, Graziela Cajado-Ogland on LinkedIn, and there is a link there to
I'll
book
put a
a
link to that.
conversation. So happy to have a conversation about what I do.
Perfect. So we will put a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes and people can connect with you and have a conversation.
Great. Thank you, Maya.